Proceed. Our next presentation will come from the Government Innovation and Cooperation Board from the state of Minnesota. Ember, where are you? And we'd like to call forward Alan Klein and Ann Barry, please.
Let us begin with a thank you for the honor of being selected as a finalist in the Innovations program. It seems like we fit in well here because the easiest way to understand the Minnesota Board is to think of us as a miniature version of the Innovations program. Just like you, we try to promote the mindset that government can and should try new ways of doing business. Just like you, our goal is to enable and empower government units to overcome barriers to innovation. So we share the goals of the innovation programs, and we've tried to find practical ways to achieve them back home in Minnesota. The barriers to innovation are well known. There are laws and rules that often mandate what must be done and how it must be done. Often they prevent any other way of doing things. Second, there are risks with innovation. There are startup costs needed to make the changes, and where will that money come from? And there are political risks as well. Will there be a political price to pay if the new idea doesn't work as well as planned? The Minnesota Board of Government Innovation and Cooperation helps local government overcome these barriers in three ways. First, the board offers financial grants to local units to help them plan and execute innovative ideas. These work like seed money, or as some now say, Ventura capital investments. Locals can have the money for the startup costs and can take the risk to try something new. Since our first round of grants awards in 1994, we have made 80 grants for pilot projects. And although there are many, many good examples, the example that we believe is one of the best is the joint state, county, and city vehicle repair facility that is described in our application materials. Second, we encourage and help to fund the actual merger of two or more cities or towns or school districts or other units of government. Merging two cities or towns is a complex undertaking. It's complex politically, it's complex financially, and it's complex legally. Just studying and presenting all of the questions and answers to the city councils or town boards is a task that stops many political mergers in their tracks. Our board will help fund a consultant, for example, to identify the issues and propose solutions even before the decision to merge has been made. And if the merger does proceed, then the board will help fund the myriad actual costs incurred by the two local units of government as they work to accomplish a merger. For the 23 years prior to the board's creation, there were only 5 local government mergers. But in the past 6 years of the board's operation, there have been 7 successful mergers and 4 more are currently pending. Now Alan Klein will discuss the third way the board helps to overcome barriers.
Thank you. Thirdly, and perhaps most unusual and innovative in itself, the board is empowered to grant waivers to state statutes and state rules that obstruct local governments from trying new ideas. Often we have statutes and rules that not only tell locals what they have to do, but precisely how they have to do it. We offer flexibility by granting waivers to these statutes and rules to let a local operation test their idea on a pilot project basis. If we find that the new method does in fact work better than the old one, then we go to the legislature along with the local unit of government and encourage the legislature to change the statute or encourage an agency to change a rule. Since the board's first waivers in 1994, the board has granted 46 waivers. And of those 46, 25, or about half, have led to a permanent change in a statute or a rule. Here's an example of how our waiver program works. The federal government has a regulation that requires states to verify the incomes of medical assistance recipients every 6 months. In response, Minnesota adopted a rule which said that every 6 months, all medical assistance recipients had to report their incomes by filing a form with their county. But every 6 months, about 20% of the medical assistance recipients in our most populated county, Hennepin County, would fail to file their income verification forms. They would lose their medical assistance eligibility, and when they needed it was only when they needed medical treatment that they discovered that this had happened. They would have to reapply and be requalified. It was a tremendous hardship and a tremendous waste of time and effort. But the county officials realized that most of their medical assistance recipients were senior citizens who were living on a fixed income. They suggested that it would be possible to use electronic data on medical recipients and match it with electronic data on Social Security benefits, which they obtained from the Social Security Administration. This would eliminate the need to file the form every 6 months. But we had this rule that said you had to file the form, and so the county sought a waiver from us. We granted the waiver on an experimental basis. The pilot project did work. We found some things that had to be changed, but it did work. And now the legislature has authorized all counties to use this new method. So that is how our waiver program works, and it's one of the 3 programs that we have to try to foster innovation within the state. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Carl.
Since laws are generally passed reflecting the interests of a broad range of constituents, and the waivers are given by a board, to what extent is public input provided for before waivers are granted? And how are interest groups that might oppose a waiver reflected in the decision-making process to grant a waiver?
All right. When we receive a waiver request, the first thing we do is ship it off to the agency. For example, if it's an agency rule, ship it off to the agency that has the rule, saying, please respond to this. And this results in a negotiation process often between the agency and the applicant, whereby those kinds of interests are brought out. Now we do have, if the agency and applicant can't agree on anything and the agency says absolutely not, we're opposed to this, the board will then have a mini hearing, if you will. It's a simple hearing. The agency comes in, the applicant comes in, we give them both about 20 minutes, and they present their sides. And it's in that process that other interests can be brought to bear. Now, we have not had other people come forward and say, I want to participate in this hearing, and I'm not sure we would want to, because...
Is that a noticed hearing? Is it the public made aware of it? Or is it just a hearing between agency and applicant, basically?
It's posted on our website, and groups like the Minnesota League of Cities, for example, and I'm sure some of the major state departments will check to see what's coming up. But I can't tell you that we publish it in the newspaper or anything like that.
Our background materials had some very positive things to say about the program, but also contained 2 questions. One was, at least for me, one was why Governor Carlson and then Governor Ventura both tried to kill the program, and also what impact it's had across the state in terms of state government. It was suggested that it's had a very strong impact in a rifle shot way, but perhaps has not had a larger impact upon the government overall.
Let me address that question, and I think they're actually tied together. I worked both in the Carlson administration and now work in the Ventura administration, and for most of those years worked in the Department of Finance, so have a background in how the budget process works. At the time that Governor Carlson was finishing his term and the new governor was elected, one of the items for a reduction in presentation to Governor Ventura was the elimination of a number of boards and councils and agencies. And so in that process, the Board of Government Innovation and Cooperation was swept up with probably, maybe 35 or 40 other boards that were being considered as part of a reduction. And many of those went forward. Governor Ventura took office or had to present, was elected in November and had to present his budget in January, giving him all of 4 weeks or 6 weeks, I guess, to put together a budget. So did he pay as close attention to all of these small boards and councils? Obviously, the real obvious support by the legislature, bipartisan support by the legislature, by local officials, helped reinforce the work of this board, so that in going forward, we're now putting together the next biennial budget, and it's not on the target list for reductions. So I would say that in the course of the last 2 years, this governor has developed support, as well as this, the entire administration. One of Governor Carlson's concerns was that, in fact, it didn't have enough of a statewide impact, that, in fact, the agency support for this was not as strong. So one of the changes in the application process this time has been state agencies need to be engaged in the process of innovation and cooperation. And so the one application that we put, or one material that we have in our applications, is that joint Minnesota Department of Transportation, a county, and a city, a joint vehicle facility. And that, in fact, we were addressing the previous governor's concern about the impact that you would have on a statewide basis and in connection with state agencies. I don't know if Alan wants to add more.
Not really. I think that covers it.
Additional questions? Bill Klinger.
Who monitors the waivers that you make local government? Is there a risk here that you sort of lessen the degree of accountability affecting the purpose of legislation and so forth? How do you monitor what happens once you give the waiver?
Two ways. First of all, our staff checks up on things, both our grants in sort of an audit concept and also our waivers to see how they're going, because every year our waivers expire unless the legislature explicitly continues them. In other words, if we grant a waiver in August, that waiver is only good until the end of the legislative session that next occurs. So let's say it ends in March. So every year we go to the legislature with a list of the waivers we've granted and recommend that they be continued or not be continued or whatever our recommendation is. And obviously the applicants have their own interests, and the state agencies that are getting waived have their interests, and so it ends up in the legislature's lap. And by the way, that's what may save it from constitutional questions, is that the legislature gets a chance to look at these things again. And so I think that process forces an eye on how these waivers are working. And oftentimes the legislature will extend them for 2 years, say, but then say, come back to us in 2 years, tell us if this is working. If it is, we'll change the statute that you got a waiver from. If it isn't, then that's the end of it.
Along those lines, has the legislature killed any of your waivers, and if so, what percentage?
No. To my knowledge, they have never killed one. Let me just think for a moment. They have modified. We have brought, essentially we've served as a way to bring an issue to the legislature saying, we felt it necessary to grant this waiver. Do you want to do something about this? Do you want to change the statute now? Do you want to let it keep going, or what? And so have they killed they haven't necessarily, no, they've never killed a waiver, but they've changed the statute in response, and sometimes they've changed it in a way the applicant may not like 100%. You know, there's a lot of compromise that goes on in this process, and the legislature says, okay, we've looked at this issue, now here's how we're going to change the statute.